Table stakes is fixing the problems because at the end of the day, I don't think that the true successful MSPs are going to be the ones who just are able to do the break fix portion of the business. There'll be much more that is going to be required, whether it's, C-level work, whether it's, other type of strategic services, whether it's, developing process that ultimately will help empower the clients, which historically has not been the role of the MSP. But I don't think that for those of us who are old enough to remember, like people who didn't know how to use their Outlook as, a massive source of revenue. But I can say that myself and my peers, to a large degree, a lot of our business right now is move, add, change from a break fix area. So it's not like the stuff doesn't break. It breaks a lot less than it used to. People understand how to use it a lot more. So the MSP now needs to provide truly value add services. And what is that?
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of From the Trenches, Bering McKinley Vision podcast series. We'll remember that this is just a chat. It's not Morty and I trying to sell you anything. It's just two guys talking about MSP, talking about business, talking about whatever the hell we want to talk about because it's our time together. So sit back, relax, enjoy. If at the end or during the middle, if we earned it, give us a like, a share, a subscribe. And if you hear something you like or that you think we're dead wrong with, leave a comment as well. We love hearing from you. But other than that, we got Morty with us today. Morty, how did you find yourself in this crazy MSP world?
Thank you, firstly, so much for having me. I appreciate the shout out. I appreciate the beginning, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today. And that's a great question. On a personal note, I had done a Series 7 and a Series 63 after I left college and couldn't stand that business and that world. If you remember the early 90s and Wolf of Wall Street or Boiler Room, which was probably more akin to the place that I actually worked at, excuse me, and while I figured I could probably pretty much do anything, I did not enjoy that environment or, or selling stocks for that matter. In any event, around those times were the times where you started fiddling with computers. People started, building things and doing their own. And, I started working at a small little game development company and I played around with their computers and trying to help build the computers and make them better. And I discovered that I kind of like this computer thing. And then I needed a job full time after that business kind of went sideways. And I answered an ad in the New York Times. Got a job in the business, started learning about it, and at some point went out on my own. Um, yeah, client number one was a family office, and we did not know what a family office was back in 1998. So, because I don't think that word existed, or maybe it did, I have no idea. Certainly didn't know, and we helped out on the residential level and the business office, as well as the staff that worked kind of like a business. And that was where we got started, mostly in a break fix world, and then we moved on to managed services probably in 2007. My business partner read a book and said, "Oh, this is very cool." Like, so
Let me guess. They read Managed Services in a Month by Carl Palachuk.
it could be, but we
Could
went
be.
to a conference in Dallas put on by MSPU, Eric
Yes.
Simpson and Gary Beecham, I think.
Yes. Yes.
And we're still in touch with a couple of those old presenters. I think Paul Dipple was there and he was talking about, benchmarking and numbers. And it was 2007. We were a break fix company. I don't even remember how large we are. Maybe we're at $1 million around or something like that at the time. And we thought we were on top of the world. I mean, come on, a company, $1 million,
Hell yeah.
like, right? Um, like, little did we know, but some of the things you pick up back then still keep you till this day. The idea that an all-you-can-eat service plan, it aligns the goals of your client and you. It's much better than having the meat around. So it was an interesting, eye-opening experience. My business partner then dug in and built a little pricing model, which was incredibly rudimentary, but off we were. So that's kind of how we got into this. And I don't know, everybody's got stories, I suppose. You probably do have yourself.
For sure. I remember fondly like those 2007 era 654. My mentor, Larry Scholes, was, probably, I think, about 20 years older than me. And I was just gobbling up every bit of information I could from him. And, really the blocking and tackling of any service-based business, and then watching the MSP unfold. It was really fun to kind of see him apply his, 20 years, 30 years of wisdom to the MSP model. And now looking back on what he got really right, what he was missing the mark on, as we all did. But it was really fun to watch those early years. And that's great that you were in. And, it's fun, you say kind of 2007-ish. I share that kind of time frame of when I think the real MSP started churning. But I'll talk to guys that call it like 2013, 14, because I think everyone just kind of adopted at their own speed or when they discovered it. So that's cool. So then you went from one industry to the gaming to starting your own. What was that like? You were a young man, starting a business in the New York area. Was that just like a very natural thing for you to start your own business, or did that feel particularly scary to you or your family?
Yeah, so I was, fairly young. There was a lot less white in the beard back in those days, and it was darker, and I was so certainly a lot lighter. So, not in complexion, but my son is doing physics now, so we talk about mass.
There
That's
you go.
so those years were certainly very different, and you know, um, it wasn't really all that hard to start a business in those days, particularly in this industry. Number one, there was really no barrier to entry, and there really isn't now either. But the barrier to entry was incredibly low. If you knew a thing or two about a PC that got plopped down on people's desks, and um, then people really could use the help. Sometimes it was educational, sometimes it was troubleshooting, oftentimes there was, procurement and licensing, and, so much of the things that we take for granted today being, X amount of generations later in the business were new to people. I mean, putting in putting in internet circuits and getting email, that was cutting edge for so many companies, probably a little bit earlier than '07, but nonetheless, like, there was a lot of work that needed to get done. There was a lot of demand for the work. Nobody really knew how to get anybody, and there was a lot of word of mouth. So if you were competent or more, you would generally get some referrals. And in a services business, which, we could talk about this at some other point, but I don't believe that a services business truly scales because you're dependent on the talent, and the talent leaves and stuff is in their head, and the documentation and the processes and all that stuff. And let's leave all the tools out of this, but it's not easy to build, a large scalable service organization, certainly to build something small where the issues are what they are and you resolve them, you bill for that time and move on. It's not that difficult, and the reality is, or was not that difficult. And the reality was, again, I think there was an enormous amount of demand at the time. I don't know if your experience was the same, but for us, we got enough money to be able to bring on a couple of people fairly quickly and keep us busy, um, on a very basic rudimentary idea of if our utilization was above whatever, and my business partner and I were going to stay a little bit below the one, the frontline technicians, then by and large we were going to cover our nut and we were going to be fine. So not particularly
Right,
complicated business.
right, right. Yeah, I like what you said about it. It's tough to make the case for these being, scalable, because it
They
always
were
does
not.
come down to, say again?
They were not.
Yeah, right. It's very, very tough. And so as you kind of went through this last, 20, 25 years, how did you go about that? We get a lot of great referrals and word of mouth to maybe being more proactive in our selling. Have you made that transition? Have you done just great not having to figure that out? Tell me a little bit about that.
So, Josh, I think that's a great question. And the reality is, I think you probably know as well as I do that most MSPs have not really cracked that nut. And to a large degree, while it's not not the same level of referral based selling that occurred back in those days, it's still highly relationship driven in the sense that most of the companies that we're dealing with today are very dependent on their MSP or an MSP with a security concentration or some other flavor of that, and therefore they would be reluctant to just you know do a bake off across 3 companies without knowing what that company might be able to do and what they stand for and whether or not any of the marketing materials are actually real. So I find that the referrals from trusted sources that are still today, generally speaking, technology professionals that get asked, who would be an MSP that you would recommend, those are still the best leads for me. That said, I don't think that ignoring the marketing funnel is a smart thing for anybody. Because at the end of the day, new people are coming around the block. And does that mean that you need to be investing in Google AdWords or doing Google search or SEO? Probably a little bit. But, maybe people are going to start finding you through ChatGPT and the like there as well. So try to understand where your AI marketing is driving your company and how people are thinking about you, or how is your TCP looking for your business, assuming, there's some sort of a match there.
Hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. I said a lot, but I'm sure you have some opinions on the subject as well.
Oh, it is, as you kind of started out there with like, perhaps I know that most people don't do, crack that nut very, very well. I think that is true. And it's always interesting to hear people's journeys with, did they find great success in some version of marketing? Did they find great success in just appointment setting or hiring that salesperson to go out? And it's such a personal thing. I can point to a couple dozen out of several thousand companies that like really figured out the sales piece and how to make that scale and how to get the owner out of having to do everything. But largely, most MSPs that we see are, 1.5 million, some two, where it's like they got there without having to figure out sales and marketing. Then the ones that get to the 5 and 6, they figure out something intentional that they're going to do. But yeah, it is kind of the Achilles heel of most MSPs for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll just, before we go off this topic for a second, I just want to. And I'll throw in a shameless plug and we could talk about this later, but I also host a podcast called Ventures and Visionaries. And in one
yeah,
of the episodes, I talked to Bob Galt, who is the chief revenue officer of a number of different companies, including some of the big names that you would know. If you want to go look up that episode, anyone could go ahead and look it up, venturesandvisionaries.com or on YouTube, and we could talk about this another time. But Bob says something very interesting, which I thought was really fascinating for me, who, excuse me, his entire life kind of resisted the idea of sales. And maybe this kind of goes back to my background in Wall Street, where like it was really about the pounding out the dials and getting the leads and then qualifying the leads and then, excuse me, and then sending them the marketing material and then calling them back and then pitching them. Like, but Bob is right. Like, it's about activity. If you show enough activity, that is, let's call it roughly intentional, you will get the outcomes that you're looking for. You don't really know the metrics because you don't know your market and you don't know the things that you're looking for. But at the end of the day, the sales to a large degree are an outgrowth of activities. And I think that that's a true statement, even though in my heart of hearts, I really don't want to believe that. So it's,
yeah, no doubt. No doubt, which I think that's yeah, it has to be true. There's just no version where we can explain any sort of growth without, either effort or activity through validation, meaning we want to do enough that if somebody does find us, they can validate that we're real and that we're present and that we're active doing things, or the outreach. And I think one of the things you mentioned was, some sort of, AI chat GPT finding us somehow. I'll tell you, man, that hit me like a ton of bricks a couple months ago. I was looking probably, for restaurants in some city, give me some recommendations, and had a great one. And I mentioned to the, whoever at the restaurant, I'm like, oh, I found you guys on Chat GPT, and they were just like blown away. And I was like, oh shit, that's probably true for MSPs. So I was talking to the person that does our marketing, and he's like, yeah, there's a word for it. Like instead of, SEO, it's like SAIEO or something like optimizing for Chat GPT. And man, he just shared so much about how Chat GPT or those types of products are like looking at Reddit, filtering out Reddit, looking at YouTube and reading the transcripts on videos to kind of say, how do you get on Chat GPT's radar so that when somebody's looking for you that way? Have you guys played with that at all yet to figure out how to optimize for Chat GPT, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say probably very, very surface, not particularly in depth. And the reality is our marketing is pretty stagnant from that perspective, meaning like what we've decided probably about a year or two ago to double down on the relationships. Like we're a New York City based company and we're focusing on our market and we're focusing on our centers of influence and we're focusing on the networking groups that are related to the professions that we want to be in and just spend time and be visible over there. Create, trust, expertise, likability, and trust in those areas rather than trying to do it on the digital side, which, while we can do a decent job at it, we would have to hire somebody and, you know, historically, we have not found all those talented people all in the same place. So, the people who are excellent designers and make your website look pretty don't really have the ability to execute on your Google Ad strategy, or they don't really have the ability to do your SEO, or they can't really put out the blogs. And like, look, being everything to everybody is generally speaking a problem. And everybody promises that. So the question really is like, what are you good at? And if you can just give me the part that you're good at rather than doing everything, then maybe that would work out better for me. But I don't really know that I have a, an authoritative answer, if you will, on AI marketing or AI ops or whatever the hell it's called. I also
You
don't
know that
remember what it's called.
that's I think you're spot on with that too. And that's something that it just kind of I got hit with it, earlier this year where the firm that does our marketing and they're awesome, Tactics Marketing. They're just awesome. And the founder, Matt, I was like, we know each other a long time, so I can really get candid with it. I'm like, Matt, what the hell, dude? Like we pay you a ton of money every month. You won't, commit to getting us this many, form submissions or whatever. And he's like, Josh, I hear you, but A, you do pay me a lot of money, but I'm trying to be your copywriter, your web designer, your graphics guy, your SEO guy, your all these things. And he said, you don't have enough money to do this optimally. So I'm here to do kind of like all the right activities, but I can be wrong too. You don't have enough money for me to be right. Pepsi doesn't have enough money for them to be right. All we can really do is do the right activities the best we can. But he had to hit me over the head with like, look at all these different things that marketing entails. And at your size and your budget, there's just no way. So I was like, that really makes sense because marketing gets a lot of grief from a lot of people, myself included. But that really helped because it's just like it's too many disciplines. It's too many disciplines, which is why I always kind of lead MSPs back to you only have enough money to do sales or marketing kind of well. I'd rather you put your money into sales and get somebody to, really get out there and start building some relationships for you because at least you can touch and hold that. But I still love marketing. It's just, do you have enough money and enough patience and creativity to make it work?
Yeah, no question. And marketing is, I'm sure, a discipline with expertise like any other. And, being that um, we are seeing the technology explosion not just in our space, but also in all these other disciplines. So, you know, um, uh, I'd be hard pressed if I heard the word HubSpot 4 years ago.
Right.
And
Right.
now I think pretty much everybody in my peer group is using probably HubSpot. Few are using Salesforce. Most are using HubSpot, and we're using something that's a lot less expensive because we don't need that level of tracking ability. Moreover, we don't necessarily want to, get into that world where there's some serious investments in that world. So, but I think 4 years ago, I don't think that I would have recalled it being as prevalent, people to be investing and intentional about marketing. Certainly the tools, I don't think were there either.
I think you're right. That's an interesting thing that you bring up HubSpot as well. We've used it now for, it's like 2016 and we were early and I remember being terrified of this new cost and new tool. And I don't think I'd be exaggerating if I suggested we have well over $100,000 into configuration, licensing, and uh, I don't regret it. But I also look back to the first 5 years with it and looking back and saying, "Oh, I had no clue what I was doing," and then having Matt and his team come in and build it out better, and it's like, okay, now we probably know we're doing better, but for all those dollars, what did I really accomplish? And I look at one of our clients who's just a really mature business owner, really great. And he's like, just tells me, he's like, dude, I will use every piece of ConnectWise until I've sapped it dry. But he said, every time I think we're getting close to like maximum use on something, I find another little bit that it's like, nope, we're not ready to switch tools yet. Unlike me, who I'm like, you put a shiny tool in front of me, and I'm running after it, in a very immature way. So I like it. I like hearing the feedback from others where it's like, nah, we'll wait. We'll make do with what we have as long as
It's
we
it's
can.
a it's a wise idea. I mean, especially look, you're a management consultant and you know that, driving gross margin is, key to business health. And obviously it's much more powerful to be able to cut costs out of the equation than bringing in the dollars because that drives much more profitability in a much, much easier way rather than, I mean, you'll tell me, I think it's 5 to 1 on the top line versus, the SG&A expense reduction where you get in any event. So, I always wonder about that. And the truth is when once I heard that metric, that kind of cured me of my shiny object syndrome. It's not
That's
that I don't want it. I do. I
right,
just need to
right.
figure out if it's worth it, you know? And and my measure, by the way, my measure changed. It used to be was like, "Oh my god, it's so cool. And look what I can play with." And now, like, well, does this really provide business value? And I'm going to really use it. And am I going to use it more than 6% of its capability? And do I really want to spend the time investing in it and figuring it all out and then potentially changing it in 3 years from now?
That's it. That's it. Right. Morty, you mentioned in our pre-talk, and you just said it a moment ago, and I think I hear this emphasis on your part about gross margin, which I am just a maniac for gross margin. I think net margin is critical, but it's if you don't get that gross margin right, if you're not really focusing on that, well, you're not going to have the G&A or the sales, money to do anything. Am I putting too much emphasis on what I'm hearing you say around gross margin, or is that a big metric for you as well?
Yeah. So let me take a step back and then I'll answer your question directly. A number of years ago, were fortunate enough to be convinced to join the Evolve peer groups, which used to be HTG back in the day. They're owned by ConnectWise, and um, we really are incredibly grateful to the community for the peer advice, and more than that, also the benchmarking. because the benchmarking really truly allowed us to try and understand our business, as opposed to, a bunch of guys kind of working together and we're charging whatever we're charging. And we kind of by muscle and feel like we're kind of making money. And at the end of the year, maybe there's a quarter where you kind of did okay. And I don't know, but if the utilization is just right, then we should be fine, but I don't know. And when do you hire anybody? And like all those questions are so subjective that when you have the ability to manage to gross margin and have the ability to do forecasting and properly build it so that you understand what your commitments are and what you've actually and how you're actually delivering, and then all the rest of it kind of layers on top of that, you're running your business as a business. And if you are, then you have the ability to make smart decisions, not because you're not trying to provide great service, but you also have the ability to try and pull back and say, well, I can bend over backwards for you and do anything that you're asking me for. However, that might cost you a couple of dollars extra. And for us, like, I'll give you an example that is probably dated, and I don't think anybody does this anymore, but certainly 10 years ago was something that was fairly common. When Apple came out with a lot of their new shiny toys, so a lot of CEOs wanted new Apple laptops. And and they didn't have Apple before. They had something else. So they wanted us to come with them shopping to the Apple store. So if you bill hourly, it's no big deal. But if it's included in a managed service, well, okay, well, how much concierge shopping are you actually doing before you start losing money on an agreement?
Right.
And if you're, supporting a hedge fund or a private equity firm or, family office or any of those kinds of companies, presumably you have other business related things other than making the CEO happy, which is good, but it's kind of like a nice to have rather than actually empowering the business to be successful. In any event, so that was kind of when we started thinking about those terms. And but the gross margin kind of zooms it in and really in a powerful business lens. And I know I kind of took the long circuitous route to get to your point, but yes, I do think gross margin is of critical importance.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, at IT Nation a few years ago, I did a presentation called Gross Profit is King. And man, it was very well received. And I'm glad to hear Evolve, kind of shines a light on that as well. It's been just, it's a way that our clients at least have been able to focus on all those 3 buckets of revenue and look at gross margin as a clue as to which one of those buckets of revenue isn't serving you well. Whether it's your service gross profit, your cloud services, your product services or product, just really looking at that P&L as a roadmap, or it's telling you a story. They say, hey, if gross profit is 39%, let's go up and look at the gross profit of those 3 lines and let's start zeroing in and zeroing in. And it's almost like a cheat code. When folks, myself included, way back when, were so net profit driven, you're muddying the waters of like, well, can I save on G&A? Can I save on sales? And it's like those are critical, but let's keep the conversation very, very separate.
We'll be right back with more. But first, here's a quick message from Bering McKinley.
Most MSPs are constantly busy, chasing tickets, projects, and fires. But without structure, it's hard to know if the business is really improving. Vision from Bering McKinley is the system that helps you work on your business, not just in it. It connects leadership strategy with daily execution. Vision aligns people, process, and performance, creating clarity and rhythm from goals to results. And the Vision app brings that structure to life, helping you create policies, track goals, review KPIs, and collaborate with your BMK consultant all in one place. Behind it all, Jetson AI, your assistant inside Vision, helps you find answers, generate insights, and take action faster. With Vision, you gain visibility, accountability, and measurable growth. You're not guessing, you're improving. Vision, Jetson, and the Vision app, your path from strategy to results. Start transforming your business today.
All right, let's get back to the conversation.
What are the cogs? What's the revenue? Are we optimized there? So glad to hear that that's an important factor for you. What um
But
what other metrics are really
before we
important to
jump
you?
off the other
Oh, go
metrics,
ahead.
I'll also say I'll add in one more dimension for anybody who's not really doing this. I'll say the following. Also, when you're smaller and your muscle and feel is, okay, I bought this computer or this switch at X dollars and I'm selling it for 25% more, or, I got a good deal on it and I'm maybe giving the client a discount, but you really know the underlying items that roll up into your P&L because you're kind of running the business, and then you get a little bit bigger. And maybe now you're specializing. Maybe you're doing more client relation stuff, or maybe you're doing more, I don't know, automation, or maybe you're doing more sales, or whatever it is that you're doing as an owner. You're not really involved in every single item that goes in and out of the business. So now you're looking at the roll up. And to your point, I need to be able to get a smart number that gives me insight, but I also need to be able to drill into it and see, as we made our decisions, did we make mistakes along the way? Because in theory, if I'm the one making that decision on the fly, I can decide, well, okay, this is included, that's not included. This is, an adequate amount of money that I can sell a particular product for. And same with, a cloud recurring service or whatever the situation is. But when things get a little bit bigger and the complexity grows, so now I have a system that's managing that, and I'm looking at the roll up and I'm trying to make a decision a month or a quarter later, and then I have to go back and zoom into all the information. And now I have all kinds of other issues, which is, death by reports and drilling into data that's not really meaningful. So now go back to gross margin, and gross margin, I think, is really the key to being able to drive the profitability of the business, because now you're really looking at what you're selling and how much you're selling it for compared to what your actual costs are.
Right. That's right. Well, let's continue on that theme and let's hear another metric that's really important to you. Do you have a couple other s- secondary numbers that help?
So the truth is that, I'm an engineer at heart. I I'm the guy who was called in when the servers broke, and, when the network didn't work, and, when the security started going haywire. And I try to look at some of the, let's call them compliance numbers on the security front. Obviously, we both know that, phishing and patching are the two banes of everybody's existence. And yet that's probably 85% of the ways that the bad actors get into any company, including, the MSPs. So I would say that looking at those numbers, patch compliance and failure on phishing, did the backups work? All those numbers to me are of critical importance, and not just on a day, but more like on the weekly trend report, just to make sure that everything is green. Um, but on the business level, I would say that um, the employee utilization is something that I'm also very concerned about. And it's an interesting perspective. You talked about scaling a services business. Obviously, maybe not so obviously, but I think about it as hours are a perishable good. That if I didn't bring to market and I didn't consume, that hour is now lost forever. So, whereas if I had a thing, perhaps I could sell it a week later, this hour is now gone forever. So it's it's both a very motivating, but also a very grind oriented type of number. So I try to
Mm,
think about that from multiple perspectives, because look, I track time for a long, long time. That's how we made money. That said, I can understand that tracking time is a grind. So, so you have to be very careful about both how you're motivating your team and how you're motivating yourself, and, you know, not losing track of the fact that keeping the main thing is that we're a people business, even though we're servicing technology, and making your people secondary to being slaves to an hour is probably not a good strategy. That said, they obviously can't sit around, twiddle their thumbs all day and not work, because then you're losing money, and then they're ruining it for the rest of the team.
yeah, that is something that has not changed at all in my 20 something years of doing this is that getting folks to enter their time, getting meaningful notes, and then kind of watching the emphasis of why it's important. And we're seeing some traction um, on getting folks to enter their time and their notes seems to have gotten just this little bit easier, so to speak, with this notion of something bad is going to happen at a client eventually. And whoever is responsible for that account, that client, whatever hands are responsible, the likelihood of you having to justify something is so high that if for no other reason, having that, what did you do and when did you do it on record is going to be the difference between a successful defense of what we did or didn't do and not being successful. So it is definitely a grind for sure. How have you guys solved that um, getting folks to enter their time in a reasonable amount of time and actually, whether you're 75% utilized or not, what are some of the things that you guys have done to get good time entry hygiene and compliance?
Yeah, so what you mentioned is absolutely true, reminding people of the importance. And, we're a bit of a Simon Sinek shop on that sense and like really start with why. So your why is a very good why. The other good why is everybody who goes into a client and then complains that, oh, the documentation is bad. And the previous guy who was in here, I don't know what they even did. And okay, well, now you're that guy who's there. And what happens to the guy who's going to come in or the gal who's going to come in after you? And now they're not going to know. So I think that you create a culture where when the documentation occurs in real time, A, it's easier. B, it's a lot quicker. You don't have to spend the grind time, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, putting in your time doing whatever it is that you can go do whatever it is that you wanted to do, rather than spending 2 hours trying to figure out what you did on a random Tuesday, a week and a half before. Um, so that also is helpful. And then lastly, the tools themselves have become a little bit easier to work with, to be completely frank, especially when you use like a dispatching model. I think the dispatcher, by creating the ticket, and if you're working tickets, you have your schedule already there. So you kind of right click and, your time's recorded and you write 2 or 3 sentences and then you're done. So you're not dealing with, each entry is not monumental. Now granted, if you have 40 of them in a week, it's a lot, but that to say that I think that overall it's not nearly as big of a lift as it used to be. Um, Still, there's wishes that I wish would be, for somebody who's not living in a ticketing board system, being able to have a better system that integrates with Outlook. For me, Outlook is crack. So, I live in my calendar, and if my calendar doesn't exist, then, moving that into ConnectWise or any other PSA would really be difficult. So, integration there into some form of a time tracking that it was fully integrated would be amazing. And, that goes to the other pain point, which is, when you have systems that are disparate and having the data sync up between the systems would certainly be wonderful. And maybe that's the next set of, unicorns that'll be coming out of the MSP space, the people that build, the non-Zapier ways of connecting the tools that don't speak to each other properly.
For sure. And I like what you kind of said around dispatch and how that might make the time entry just a little easier for folks. We've spent, decade plus kind of getting to the bottom of, why don't techs enter their time? And I think my first 5 years of doing this, techs are bad. They don't enter their time. They didn't enter their time. They're a bad tech. And, ran with that for way too long. And I think it comes down to, without a dispatcher in particular, that tech is wearing the weight of the world on their shoulders. They have to make this decision dozens of times a day sometimes of, do I stop and enter my time or do I go help the next client? And until that makes sense to an owner or service manager, whatever, you're just going to live in a really frustrating world. And when we can start removing those things that are not directly related to what that tech is there for, which is we hired you to solve complex technical issues for our clients and be nice. That's it. When we're asking you to do all these other things like remember, recall to, email that person back, prioritize what you should be working on next, that takes up so much brain space and so much task switching that it's like, hey, let's just work on removing all the other stuff and we're probably going to get a better outcome.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely accurate in the sense that removing friction certainly creates better outcomes. Not even a question. I'll also say that what could also be around the corner is a lot of let's call them AI for lack of a better term, whether it's agentic or some other thing that, allows you to do some of these tasks in a much more efficient way. I mean, doctors forever would walk into the patient and then they would dictate their notes, and that would probably go to a number of people in some foreign country where the notes would be transcribed and entered into the electronic medical record system. But we have systems that don't have that kind of sophistication, nor do we have, maybe we do have an assistant elsewhere in the world, but, even if we do, they're not really taking my dictation and starting to do timesheets. Um, but making it easier, making it faster, making it quick for me to be able to just record a voice note and either get it transcribed or attached to the ticket, and it knowing how long I was there for based on when I walk, like just the intelligence that otherwise already exists. It's not like this is new stuff, you know? So just removing the duplicate and quadruplicate entry of the same information into multiple places, I think in and itself would be a massive win for the people who really just want to spend time helping people and not spending time doing documentation, but they are annoyed when it's not there. So I don't know. Hold on a second. I think I may have lost you. Let me just make sure I didn't. No, Josh, I can't hear you, but there you're back.
Am I back now?
You're back.
Okay, great. All right. My microphone died. Okay. All right. Yeah. So Morty, and editors will kind of start over here. Um, Yeah, I've used those analogies around perishable nature of hours, the doctor dictating. I think those are just so spot on. And I wonder, so many great tools have come out, and I'm like, my $1 million idea, but I don't have the money or the resources to figure it out. It's somebody has to work on a way to automate the time entry. It's got to be right around the corner. And it's like, is it reading your calendar? Is it reading your remote session? Is it on the phone? What is it? But I know it's just got to be so close. If somebody's working on it, they'll figure it out, hopefully in our lifetime.
Yeah, I would think again with a lot of these new tools that are really, really promising, I would be very surprised if we're still in the same position in 5 years. Maybe that's a long time, but I don't know. Like it's gotta be getting better.
Yeah, it is like I joke with people all the time, and I'm only hardly joking. Like techs not entering their time has put food on my table, my kids through college, because it just kills the MSP. And it's not fun money to take, but we make a difference. But
A
it's
living.
that if I can't get good time entry, I can't trust my AGP report. I can't trust my utilization report. All I can do is go on a gut. And frankly, MSPs have done just fine, kind of doing the best they can, but the world can be so much better if we master that. Let me ask you this: with that idea of utilization being heavy, uh, I'll meet enough MSPs every year who are still kind of figuring out this notion. I'll say, "Hey, how are we at enter our time?" or emphasize that, and they'll say, "We're managed services. We don't need to enter our time." If and that was really popular to hear in like 2010 or 12 because they just hadn't yet connected the dots between, well, true, you're not going to bill for that time the way you once did, but the data of having it is critical. Did you ever go through that phase where it's like the emphasis on time entry just kind of diminished, or did you see clearly, even during the early days of managed services, that time entry was still critical?
It's funny, and I don't remember if this is accurately attributed to Peter Drucker or it's just apocryphally said so that you measure you get what you measure. And I'm sure I butchered the quote, but in any event, the to answer your question, I don't think that we really went through the phase of, completely going managed services and at the same time suffering from a complete abandonment of the timesheets. And the reason is that while we switched our billing model, our compensation model remained the same, at least from an incentive compensation package, where billable hours were still driving incentive comp for the engineers. So they were still very much incented to track their time, make sure their utilization was high, and not waste a lot of time on, internal stuff and things that were not client facing and value add. That changed a number of years ago when we tried to align the goals of the business and the goals of the technicians and start to incent people on gross margin. The reality is that while as a business owner, I think I understand that, I think that a technician or your average technician who probably never took accounting in school doesn't understand how to read a P&L, doesn't understand what gross margin is or what it means to him or her. So it becomes a complicated, it's a complicated equation. It's a little easier to tell people, okay, you're 75% billable, you need to be at 76%, and that really will equate to X amount of dollars in your bank account. It's relatively easy for people to understand. Gross margin, they don't really understand what their activities did over the course of a quarter to say, oh, I impacted it up, I impacted it down. Did I show up a little bit more? Did I kind of leave a little early? Like that's very hard for people to draw those connections.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And it's interesting. I had David Spire on the podcast earlier today. His episode won't be released for several weeks now, but he was an early client, and I remember him talking about um, incentive programs, and I think he introduced me to the book Open Book Management, and everyone kind of has a little different take on it, but he put this, to your point, he was like, I can't imagine that my technicians are going to organically understand the P&L and connect how they, impact it. So he put into play this thing called dollars and donuts, where it was like, if you want to participate in the profit sharing, then you must go to, $5 and donuts sessions like 6 a.m. and he's bringing donuts. And it's like, if you go through this and, you learn what this means and how you impact it, then you get to participate in the pool. And it was really, really smart. And I've seen that work wonders for him, all this 10, 15 years later. But yeah, making incentives that the technicians can understand the why, making it so they can understand what they do to impact it is so, so important. With that though, let me ask you, I'll share a thought and you tell me, your take on it. I I like to say that utilization, when done in a masterful way, is as much or more a reflection of the dispatcher's optimization as it is a technician. Take that with and tell me what you do with that.
Give me a sec. Let me think about this for a second.
Yeah, sure.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that the dispatcher drives effective utilization more so than the technicians themselves.
Yeah.
Um, I think I can get behind that. Um, I think that the part of me that is a little bit resistant is that I always believe that that at the end of the day, I want to achieve better outcomes for my clients. So I want the dispatcher to also be doing, the easy tickets and get rid of them and just, don't give the technicians that just work because, oh, a ticket came in, I now dumped it over here. Like,
Mhm.
so I want to say yes, and that would
Right,
probably
right.
be it. Yes, and I don't know how much and is involved in this.
So that's interesting. So okay, so I think I'm learning a little bit more about your dispatch philosophy. For me, I think the dispatcher owns three things. They own the hours of the technician, they own the day, and they own the tickets, meaning they're to get them, through to completion in a
Right.
hygienic way. You have your dispatcher doing some very level one type work, it sounds like.
I mean, that's certainly my ideal, right? Because I want to make sure that that first touch is creating a positive impact for the client.
Mm.
Meaning, what do people dislike? Let me tell you the story. I'm going to write it down. And then the person gets the ticket, doesn't read the notes, or does read the notes and doesn't understand. Now the person needs to repeat themselves again. And let's assume, for argument's sake, this is a complicated issue and the person Googled their own stuff and tried to figure it out. So now we're taking this to an L2 or an L3. And now they need to repeat themselves yet again. So people get really annoyed. I know I do. Like, when I go on some credit card company and I get escalated 3 times or whatever the situation is, or travel problems, like, all that stuff is annoying,
Yes.
so why would I wanna put my clients through that experience? So, yes, I hear you on the efficiency, but I kinda wanna balance that with the experience because at the end of the day, they're not just buying an outcome of a fixed computer. They remember how they feel.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you might be you're definitely onto something. I think there's gradients of that where I see some people who say, um, my dispatcher needs to do a certain number of billable hours, or somebody saying, I don't like dispatch at all. I want my clients to get the person who will help them every time. And I just think those models are, I think all the models are tough, but it sounds like you've found a real nice sweet spot of you can have your dispatcher help out, and also keep that board really clean and keep those tickets moving along, which I think is a pretty ideal state
I mean,
of
look,
balance.
obviously, I don't want to create the illusion that we have it all figured out. I think some of the things that we're talking about at the moment are slightly more academic than in practice. And obviously, look,
Sure.
every situation is different. And then certainly, when you have people calling or texting or chatting or whatever it is that they're doing with frontline support, sometimes things don't go well. So I don't want to create the illusion that, by the way, like it's all unicorns and rainbows.
Yeah.
Um, but listen, my intention is to create a positive experience. My intention is to solve people's problems more quickly. My intention is to, create a choice for people, much like you have the ability, or you used to before COVID, walk into Starbucks and you could either tell them to put the half and half in your coffee or you would pour it in yourself. And like
Right.
you'd have the ability to do the things and you had a choice. And as the people who wanted to wait longer in line would have the barista do it, or you would do it yourself and get the heck out of the store. So as a New Yorker who's impatient, I pump my own gas and I'm not going to wait for the full service station, not just because it's more expensive, but because I don't wait for them. So,
That's right.
you know, I firmly believe that giving people choice and helping them feel empowered to get to the resolutions that they're looking for is the key. But I also want to caveat this as well. Like we all know that at the end of the day, that's table stakes, right? Table stakes is fixing the problems because at the end of the day, I don't think that the true successful MSPs are going to be the ones who just are able to do the break fix portion of the business. There'll be much more that is going to be required, whether it's, you know, C-level work, whether it's, other type of strategic services, whether it's, you know, developing, developing process that ultimately will help empower the clients, which historically has not been the role of the MSP. But I don't think that for those of us who are old enough to remember, like, people who didn't know how to use their Outlook as, a massive source of revenue. But I can say that myself and my peers, to a large degree, a lot of our business right now is move, add, change from a break fix area. So it's not like the stuff doesn't break. It breaks a lot less than it used to. People understand how to use it a lot more. So the MSP now needs to provide truly value add services. And what is that? So you need to truly be introspective and figure out, well, what it is, what do I do well? What kind of experience do I bring to the table? And how do I help my clients? What are their needs other than just fixing? I was talking about this earlier to somebody else. Um, my wife has a funny story. So about 15 years ago, we needed a new roof in the house. So we put a new roof in the house and we spent whatever we spent on that roof. And my wife sits down on the couch and goes, I had a roof. Now I have a roof. I spent all this money and I have exactly what I had before. Don't feel like I got anything. It was a spot on
Uh,
observation and about
yeah.
like, you wanna feel like you got something. I got a new phone, I got a new laptop, I got something new, I feel good about the thing that I got. But
Right.
if all I have is the same computer that works exactly the same way, so really, what kind of value am I bringing to the table as an MSP? And I think that those are going to be the areas that we're going to all be challenged in, in the next evolution, the next 18 months that are going to create the next technology generation and the one after that. And, you know, you and I have the gray hairs, so we've been around the block for a couple of years. The young guys are going to the young guys and women who are coming into this space are going to be the ones who are going to start thinking about this differently and figure out how to, make the business, I don't know. What does MSP3 4.0 look like?
Well, I'll tell you what, you figure that out and tell me first. I think it's on that, and I know we'll kind of start winding down here a little bit. What what is next? Is it automation? Is it AI? Is it more, kind of business consulting with a technology, flair to it? What's next for MSPs, do you think? What are you
Yes.
looking at?
Yes. All those
Yes to
things.
all the above? Yeah.
Yeah, all those things. And look, obviously cybersecurity is important too. The question is, to what degree do you want to be involved? And, we spoke a little bit before about being an expert and knowing, who you are and what your talents are. And do you have a Holocaust cloak? And, that was a Princess Bride reference for all those who, you know, list your assets, figure out what you got. What are you going to do? How good are you at those things? And like truly, truly do, a SWOT analysis on yourself and figure out, well, if I want to be this, do I have that capability in-house, in myself? Do I have the ability to learn what it is that I want to go and sell? Do I have the ability to understand it well enough to be able to have that conversation with my client? And that's sometimes a completely misaligned thing, right? Because you'll have an MSP that's running a $5-10 million company that's selling to the mid-market. That's a $200 million company. You're talking to the CFO. You're not speaking the same language. You're not running the same business, right? Just because I can cook a burger in my backyard doesn't mean that I can run a burger joint. It certainly does not mean that I can run a burger chain or a franchise. So, like, all those things need to evolve. Like, what exactly you're selling, who you're selling to, what is the language that you're using? Are you able to communicate with whoever is your buyer? And are you able to truly understand what their needs are and what it is that's motivating them to make the decisions? And can we have an intelligent conversation and solve those things? And can you break it down into something that they can understand what you're talking about? And is there value there? And is it actionable? Or is it just like, a lot of pontificating up in the air?
Right. Yeah, um it's gonna be interesting. You said the table stakes earlier, just getting the problem solved, and I'm always slow to kind of name what the table stakes are at any given point because I'm wrong usually more than I'm right on these things. But it is that next generation of owners and leaders and technicians that are going to help drive that. Let me kind of wind us down with this question. Are you being in business as long as you are, you're very articulate around technology and business. Have you put yourself in a position in the business where you get to, kind of pontificate and ideas and visionary? Is that where you like to be? Are you too addicted to the game of being frontline? Where do you find yourself in your business these days?
And I thank you for asking that. Being a business owner and being one who delivers services to clients, it's not common that anybody asks me what I like to do. So I'll take a moment to revel in the gratitude that is, it feels really good to be asked. I'll answer the question in a couple of different levels. And the number one, I really enjoy helping people. It's why I went into this business in the first place. So, back in those days, it was helping people with buying their computer, getting things set up, small networks and stuff like that. But today, being that I now have a different level of expertise, I find myself gravitating more towards relationship building, relationship nurturing, um, consulting, strategic consulting, roadmap development, strategic services, advisory services, budget development for clients, and being able to help them truly understand what does the next 18 months, 3 years, or maybe even longer look like for their business from a technology prism. Now, it doesn't mean that whoever is making those decisions, whether it be the CEO, CFO, COO, or somebody that's involved in compliance and or technology, needs to understand everything that we're talking about. But the business decisions and the risk mitigations or capitalizing on opportunities, those are pretty big. And being able to articulate them, being able to have the people appreciate what you're doing for them, help them solve the problems that otherwise they just all they see is a big, ball of yarn that's been twisted into a big knot, and they don't know how to start pulling it apart to figure out, well, how do I even start? And what steps do I take? And how do I think about this problem? And what's the context? And, well, yes, the context is relevant, but what do I do? Because everybody wants to do something, and a lot of people just don't know what to do. So being able to outline all those things, I find an enormous amount of gratitude. And even internally at our firm, like I find that, the visionaries are able to talk at the visionary level and the integrators are able to do, but being able to be that translator between the vision and what needs to be done and what's on the to-do list. I wonder if that's a special skill that has not yet been articulated by the Gino Wickmans of the world and whoever else does that kind of business thinking. Because yes, I can articulate a vision, but does that mean that I know what tasks I need to create and at what priority and how important are they? And, what am I comfortable with on a failure level, especially when I'm going into areas that are full of a lot of unknowns? I'm generally personally very comfortable in those places, and I enjoy it. I find it interesting to think about problems that I've not thought about before. I enjoy learning new industries, new processes, and I also enjoy taking timeless concepts and helping people apply those timeless concepts to what they think might be an insurmountable, unique issue that really at its core is something that's been solved multiple times by some very, very smart people. And if you can truly remove a lot of the a lot of the specifics that exist in your environment that it's not important. I know I said a double negative there. It is important. However, it's not the root cause of your issue. And if you can truly identify what that root cause is and solve that at the root, you know, in Goldratt style, you have dozens of undesirable effects that ultimately melt away. And that is just so, so cool to see. I get
Hmm.
an enormous amount of personal satisfaction when A, you truly identify the root cause. you clearly articulate what the root cause, define your action plan, and start taking action to remediate the root cause, and then everything starts to get really better very, very quickly. I love that. I love that.
That's
That's a
awesome.
lot of fun.
That's awesome. Do you get the opportunity to flex that very often?
Sometimes, it's, sometimes. It depends. It depends. I think everybody's on their journey. My journey on a personal level is, as a young man, I always thought that in order to progress, you needed to push really hard. And the image would be, the man pushing that boulder up the hill, or again, the woman. This is not a sexist thing. It's just, you know, and what I'm trying to understand is that um, a lot more comes when you allow reality to unfold rather than trying to force it your way. Because I, I don't even know that I can articulate this, but you know, the universe tends to answer the call in a richer, more beautiful way um, than you could possibly imagine. And it's very hard. I won't speak for anybody else. It was very hard for me to appreciate the bounty and the amazingness of life while I was trying so hard to make the things that I thought needed to happen happen. And it didn't quite work out the way I wanted, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't good.
That's right. I like that statement about the universe and what it can deliver. It may not always give it to you in the way you wanted, but it will give you. You ask for strength, you ask for wisdom, it'll give it to you, but you may not love exactly how it's presented to you.
I had a teacher years ago who would say, people pray for a Ferrari, but does that mean that you're now going to drive it into a brick wall?
Right.
Like, we don't understand the ramifications of what we want. And, I think what I'm trying to do more is be more open and try to, you know, understand what I have and be more in gratitude and be more appreciative. And maybe it's an age thing, or maybe it's just a journey thing, with we didn't really talk about the politics, and I don't really know that I want to go anywhere there, with the exception to say that we are so blessed to live where we are and have all the things that we have. And if we could just spend a moment listening to each other rather than trying to put each other down or stomp on each other's ideas, and um, I I wonder if things would just be a lot better.
Beautifully put, and I can sure appreciate that. Morty, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I'm very grateful for that. Where can people find you out in the world?
So thank you, Josh. You can find me on my email, morty@kjtechnology.com, Mordy Hackel on LinkedIn. Feel free to message me or connect with me. I'd love to speak. The podcast is at venturesandvisionaries.com or on YouTube/Ventures and Visionaries. It's in all the podcast platforms. But we love talking to interesting people about all manners of business and leadership and the journey that people have had, and maybe we can reciprocate and do this in the other direction too one of these days, Josh.
Very good. Everyone else, thanks for coming along on this conversation. Again, if we earned it, throw that like, share, subscribe down there. If you got comments, leave them. Otherwise, thanks for joining us. And Morty, thank you again.
Josh, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye bye.